What up, hustle homies? Welcome back to another episode of the Low Carb Hustle podcast. If you're looking to put a little bit of muscle behind that low carb hustle, you are in the right spot. Today, I'm so pumped because I got a good friend on the show, someone who I really look up to, a really smart guy who's always innovating, studying the most recent trends, the things that are not only working in the trenches in his practice, but also like the latest research and the things that are working in the lab. So I'm so pumped to introduce my friend, Sachin Patel. Sachin's a father, a husband, a philanthropist, a functional medicine practice success coach. He's a speaker, an author, a breathwork facilitator, a plant medicine advocate, and you got an international best-selling book. But the one thing that I love about Sachin is he's convinced that the doctor of the future is the patient. So he's all about putting information and education in patients' hands so that they can start taking care of themselves at a really high level where they're not always going to the doctor. And so I think that's such a refreshing viewpoint. Sachin, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, my friend. Thank you. It's so great to connect. And I'm so excited for our conversation today. Thank you for having me.
So, yeah, absolutely. So, but before we jump in, we met through the Front Row Dads summit in like 2019, back before, back in 2019, we were like, oh man, it's so crazy right now. The world's so wacky. And then the world was like, oh yeah, bet I'll show you something. And you were the first person to kind of open my eyes to some of the power of fungus and of mushrooms. And so we had a lot of conversations about that, about you were the kind of the catalyst for me starting to go down that road and like putting a lot of more reishi mushrooms and things, using that, like the turkey tail and lion's mane. And I put in all that in my shakes and kind of passing that off to my clients as well. How, like, do you still have the same kind of fascination with mushroom products and using mushrooms? Has that changed at all? Or have you learned anything new recently?
I've taken mushrooms every single day since and even prior to that. So it's something that is baked into my daily routine. I take turkey tail, lion's mane, reishi, cordyceps, and chaga every single day in an elixir that I make in the morning. And, I continue to be blown away and fascinated also by medicinal mushrooms like psilocybin, which, the world needs now more than ever because of all the trauma that we're going through and experiencing. And the fact that we need to shift from separateness to oneness. And so I incorporate them into my diet on a daily basis. We incorporate them into our food often. And it's something that, has become a part of my lifestyle. It's almost passive now. I don't even think about it really, but I have not lost my respect or fascination with them.
Cool. Do you notice it? Do you ever miss a day?
I have not, as far as I can remember. So even when we travel, we take our elixir blend and all the ingredients and everything with us. And so that's something that is that I'm really, really consistent with.
Well, I was going to ask if like you notice a difference on days when you miss or anything like that, but it's hard to ask that question to someone who's incredibly consistent.
It's kind of like brushing my teeth, right? Certain things you just do, and they become a part of who you are. So that's one of those things that has become a part of who I am.
I think that's a great point because my mom didn't call me up last night and was like, hey, did you finish brushing your teeth? Did you make sure your teeth are clean? It's just a habit, right? We just do those things. And I think that, for people kind of on the fence or trying to get back in shape, exercise or nutrition or prepping their food, like it feels like these insurmountable obstacles that need a lot of accountability. But what you're describing is like, this is just a habit. This is just what I do. And I think that's where we kind of should strive to get to in those areas that are important to us.
Yeah. If I could add to that, it's really about identity, right? It's who we identify as, and then it becomes so much easier, right? If you identify as somebody who works out when it's convenient, then guess what? You're only going to work out when it's convenient. But if you identify as somebody who works out because it's important to my health and my health is important to my family, my business, my community, and my contribution and the quality of life that I live, then you're much less likely to miss a day, or you're much less likely to skip weeks at a time for some people, right? So I think a lot of it has to do with who we identify as, and of course, who we identify with, and that's the people we surround ourselves with.
Ooh, I love that. And we're going to talk a little bit more about community today, but I really like what you said about that, because we don't make decisions that are outside of our identity. If we're like, I'm a good person, we're not like going around being like, hey, here's a knife, give me your money. That's so far outside of our thought process. So we're like, I'm a healthy person. I exercise daily. I'm going to sweat every single day or take a walk. And that's just a part of who you are. Now it's not a big deal. I like to talk to people about doing the boring work. That was a great quote that I really like. It says, be boring and orderly in your in your life, so you may be violent and original in your work. And I really like that kind of is like relating back to your elixir, that's boring. You just something you do on a regular basis. So it allows you to have the energy, the vitality, the focus for your family, relationships, the things that are important to you.
100%. I agree.
What if you don't mind, you want to share a little bit about what's in that elixir? Like I'm super curious because everything you do, I want to do. I'm like, so.
Absolutely. I'm happy to share. So I used to make it with coffee. And since the beginning of this year, I cut out coffee just to see what would happen. And it used to originally have something called King Coffee, which is a combination of instant coffee, organic coffee, and organic reishi mushroom spores. So now I take the spores in a capsule form instead, but I still make the elixir. And I use something called Dandy Blend, which is a roasted dandelion root, which tastes almost identical to coffee. So it kind of gives me that flavor and that boldness and no caffeine. The other thing that I add to it is maca powder. I add organic cacao powder, and really everything's organic. I add a 5 mushroom blend, which has the 5 mushrooms that I mentioned earlier. And I'll also add powdered MCT oil. So I'm getting some healthy fats, some healthy, prebiotics, and I'm also getting some healthy herbs and no stimulants. So it allows me to, create, energy without being stimulated. And it's very satiating, as you can imagine, with the fats being in there and the nutrient density of it. It's quite satiating. So it kind of takes me through until my lunchtime, which is when I have my first official meal.
What have you noticed cutting out coffee for? Because that's been now, what are we in? We're in April, so like 4.5 months, no coffee.
Yeah, actually, I didn't notice any difference, to be honest, in terms of my energy or focus or anything like that. So that's why I never really incorporated it back into my diet. I didn't really, I guess everyone metabolizes caffeine differently. So some of us, it takes a lot of caffeine to stimulate us. Some of us, it doesn't take very much, and we take a long time metabolizing it and processing it. But for me, I can honestly say I didn't really notice a difference. Didn't have any withdrawal headaches or cravings or anything like that. And I did, just in full transparency, have, I was at a baby shower reception, and they had some coffee out, and I'm like, oh, let me just try this. And I took one sip and I just spit it out. It didn't even, and probably more had to do with the quality of the coffee that I was drinking more than anything else. But that was the only sip of coffee I had since the beginning of the year. So for me, I didn't really notice much of a difference, to be totally honest.
Did you go cold turkey on it, or did you like kind of shift off of it? I know the King coffee doesn't have a ton of caffeine. It's like 80 milligrams per serving. So it's not like you were having 400 milligrams from Starbucks.
Yeah. So yeah, for me, I'm a very like cold turkey kind of guy. So I'm all or none. I'm very binary. It's either I'm all in or I'm all out.
All right, cool. I try to take a break every like 3-6 months, and I'll do 2 weeks off. But for the first 3 or 4 days, I get kind of like the middle of the forehead headache, and it reminds me to drink a lot more water those couple of days. But very interesting.
I'm actually interested. I don't know if you know that Dave Asprey's got a new coffee out. It's called Danger Coffee. And it's I think it's just starting to ship to Canada now. So I'll probably try it out just to kind of see what's up with it. It's a remineralized coffee, so it's designed to help replenish minerals that coffee is usually depleted of in the processing of it.
Oh, interesting. Also, I love that name, Danger Coffee. I feel like why does coffee get all the cool names like Bulletproof Coffee, Danger Coffee? There's another brand I like called Strong Coffee. Those are great names.
Yeah.
Death Wish Coffee. That's the one with like 1 million milligrams of caffeine in it.
Liquid Death. There's probably one called Liquid Death, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think you're right. Or that's a beer. But it's one of the two. So you mentioned like remineralized coffee. You've talked about your elixir. You're obviously very, very intentional about what you put into your body. And there's a quote that you said that I really, really liked. And you said, if you want to meet God, turn your body into a temple, not a trash can filled with industrial excrements. And that's harsh, but I love it. So like, what are some of the areas that you feel like, even healthy people we're just not necessarily taking the right steps, or we're like believing like, oh, this is something that's good for me, when in reality it's negative?
I think a big thing is a big issue that we have is, in my perspective, is we've been conditioned to think we need to eat a lot more than we actually do. And so it's this excessive amount of calorie intake. and this idea that we need to just consume, consume, consume. So as a culture, we've become very consumptive, and that means we're consuming, and the way I look at it is like it's what we're consuming in all of our orifices, right? So what's going in our ears, what's going in our nose, or what's going in our eyes, what's going into our mouth, all of those things factor into what we would call, let's call it our diet for now. So I think a lot of it is overconsumption, and it's really the space in between our meals that's very important, that's often overlooked. So things like fasting are very often overlooked. The timing of our meals is very often overlooked, right? The time of day that we eat, the times of day that we don't eat, what happens in between those meals. It's all of those things that we need to take into consideration. So a big a big thing that for a lot of people they need to take into strong consideration if they're not already is the quality of the water that they drink. And I heard this quote and I really stuck with me, is that if you don't filter your water, you become the filter. So start by drinking and showering and using clean water in your home. So we've got a reverse osmosis in our house that remineralizes the water that we drink, and then our whole house is, the whole system is we have a whole house water filtration system. So we're also showering in clean water. Things like volatile organic compounds end up in our water, which end up in our lungs, which ends up in our body. The fastest way to get something into your bloodstream aside from injecting it is to inhale it. So when you're taking a hot shower, you're inhaling millions and millions of molecules of volatile organic compounds, and that's something that's often overlooked. Another big thing that we want to look into with our clients is eating as organic as they possibly can, right? So, some foods are not always available organic or not as easy to find, but as much as you can, try to eat organic. The Environmental Protection Agency releases a report every single year that has the 12 most common foods that are sprayed with pesticides and contaminants. And then it also has the clean 15, which are the 15 cleanest foods that may not matter as much if you're eating them organic, but whenever available, I always suggest eating organic. So avoiding the contamination of our food, and consuming molecules like glyphosate in particular. Glyphosate is designed to kill weeds, and one of the things that it does is it actually binds to the sites that glycine would normally bind to. And glycine is used for ligament and tendon production, for example. It's also used for proper detoxification in our body. So that becomes compromised if we're consuming these industrial toxins, which they say that it's safe for us to consume because we lack a specific pathway in our liver called the shikimate pathway. But the problem with that is that our bacteria, which make up our immune system in our microbiome, don't lack that pathway. So essentially, these compounds destroy our gut microbiome, which then leads to a whole host of issues. A compromised immune system, it leads to intestinal permeability, chronic low-grade inflammation, and it creates an environment for non-friendly bacteria and parasites and pathogens to thrive in. So there's a lot to unpack when you ask that question, but those are some things that come to mind.
Follow-up question. Are you available every single month for the next like 4 or 5 years just on this podcast? Because I have so many questions about that one statement that we can't possibly even get into all of them.
Hey, if it means helping more people, I'm all in.
You're the best. Okay. So a couple of things I wanted to go back to. Number one, kind of talking about the diet as the things you consume with your eyes, your ears, everything else. Like I've been looking at a lot of people on Instagram who've got neck tattoos, and I guess I'm just very susceptible because now I'm like, I should get a neck tattoo, and I probably shouldn't, to be honest with you. So I like that. I like that distinction. I never thought about the water and using your body as a filter. And then the thing I really wanted to talk about though was organic. I feel like a lot of people that I talk to who are kind of, health type people get burnt out on organic because they're like, we don't know. Is it really organic? Is it just a label? Like, how do we determine what are the good foods versus what is just a marketing strategy?
Yeah, the USDA has some pretty strong guidelines around what's considered organic. So you can certainly bet the barn that it's going to be less toxic than something that is not labeled as organic. One of the things that I encourage people to do is to get to know their farmer if possible. So going to a farmer's market, for example, is a great place to meet the people that actually grow your food. And that's probably the food that they're feeding their families as well. So, find a local farmer that you can get to know and eventually trust, And then also, if you can, grow your own food. There's lots of tools that are available to us nowadays for us to grow our own food. And so if we're unclear or uncertain about the organicness of the food, I don't know if that's a word or not, but
It is now.
it is now, right? So if we're concerned about that, then hey, grow a garden and consume as much of your own food as you can. There's some great products. There's something called a garden tower, which allows you to grow greens year round. And that's always a possibility for people. And
Okay.
if, you know what, here's another thing. There's, if you are concerned, I mean, here's the thing, there's going to be residual waste, industrial waste chemicals on pretty much all of our food, right? And so one of the things that we would encourage people as an insurance policy is to take a biotoxin binder. So there's a company called Cellcore that makes something called biotoxin binder. And so when you're unsure or when you're in doubt, or let's say you eat at a restaurant and you're not sure if the food is organic or not, because chances are it may not be, unless it specifically says that, then you can take a biotoxin binder, which will bind up a lot of those chemicals in your body and then pull them out of the system.
Okay, so basically, eat organic is going to be healthier than not. You're always going to end up with something. There's a couple of insurance policies you can make. Otherwise, just grow your own food. I think that's a good practice, anyways. And you said growing your own food is like printing your own money. So
it sure is, right? It sure is. And depending on where you live, like we live in Canada, so we've got a indoor garden that we've created. You can't grow everything in that, but you can grow your microgreens and things like that in that. And then in the summer, so we just had a snowfall yesterday, believe it or not. And there's always one in April. It's kind of crazy. You think it's spring, and then all of a sudden there's snow. But we've got a garden that we've planted outside, and so we're going to start nurturing that. And I think that it's a great exercise, even if you don't get a lot of yield. It's just a great exercise in valuing the amount of effort that goes into growing food. Because you go to the store, you buy a box of microgreens, and you don't even really give it much thought. But then if you try to grow that much food yourself, you start to realize, wow, there's a lot of effort and love and care that goes into this process. It's not something that just pops up out of the ground without intention. So it's a great exercise in building dopamine up as well, because every day you go out there and you see these plants growing, it exercises patience. It exercises this, this idea of what you reap, what you sow, and it builds up character to grow your own garden as well.
It's probably a meditative practice as well. Do you are you growing any mushrooms, psilocybin or otherwise, in your garden? You don't have to answer that if you don't want
to. There's actually so not in the garden. So psilocybin typically grows really well on cow patties or on horse patties. So there's actually a company that sends me a bag that is 2-year-old horse manure, and then you inject it with a syringe that has spores in it, and that allows you to grow, beautiful psilocybin mushrooms. So there are ways that you would do that, but ideal conditions for the psilocybin mushrooms would not be in the garden; it would be on a cow patty.
Okay. Now, when you're talking about, I've seen a lot of research recently about microdosing psilocybin rather than what a lot of people think of, just like taking a bunch at once and having like a trip. What are your thoughts on the difference between those two, or do you have a preference if you want to go into that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I would suggest both. I think that it's worthwhile for everyone, especially politicians, in my opinion, and CEOs of companies, entrepreneurs, especially parents, I think is another category that I would deem necessary for them to have their own kind of psychedelic experience, because, there's, all of us have trauma. All of us have, childhood experiences, maybe some of them even pre-verbal, that we carry with us, whether we realize it or not. And I feel like a hero's journey is something where you're taking about 3 to 5 grams, blindfolded. Maybe there's music, there's community, there's there's an intention, deep intention that's set into the process. You're allocating 3 to 4 hours of your life to this, and you have somebody sitting with you. That process can be, transformative, for somebody who hasn't done it. If you're sitting on the fence about it, for example, listening to this, definitely you want to have the right set and the right setting. So you want to set the right intention. You want to have the right people there surrounding you, and somebody who is going to create the right environment for you to be able to have that experience. And it truly is an inward journey. So a lot of people, when they describe their mushroom trips, it's a very outward experience. But when we go blindfolded, then it's a very inward experience, and we're able to, really work through some limiting beliefs. We're able to work through some trauma and resolve some of our most persistent chronic challenges that we might be facing, and things that are in fact holding us back. So, I encourage people to explore that possibility if it's available to them. A lot of times, when we ask for it, it shows up. So it's not something you go hunting for or seeking. The opportunity oftentimes presents itself when the timing is right for you. So it's not something I force people to do or, encourage people to go like hunt far and wide for it. It usually presents itself when you're ready for it. So that's one way to look at it. And the microdosing is an imperceptible dose, usually a 20th of a hero dose. So for some people, that's going to be about 150 to 200 milligrams. And that's usually taken on an every third day basis. So maybe Monday would be an appropriate dosing cycle. You can add it to your elixir in the morning if you want. You can simply chew it. You can grind it up and put it into a capsule and take it that way. So there's a variety of ways to dose it. And it's really an imperceptible dose. So it's not something you're noticing that there's certainly no tripping out taking place. You may notice, may even forget that you took it that morning or earlier in the day, but you might notice that everything you're naturally drawn to nature. The trees look more beautiful. The leaves, look greener. The grass looks greener. You're, for whatever reason, more present to wherever you are, and more present to your family, more present in your conversations. In fact, many times, if I microdose and I'm speaking to a client, I'm actually finishing their sentences. So I'm so present and so aware of, where the conversation is going that I oftentimes find myself finishing their sentences. So it's a pretty, fascinating experience for those that haven't done it. And it's very benign in the sense that you're not intoxicated, you're not inebriated, there's no hangover that takes place. Like most people, nobody would even know that you did it, for example. So it's very imperceptible. But what's happening is something that's really powerful, which is the brain is going through a process called neurogenesis, where we're actually creating and developing new neural networks and connections within the brain. So we're able to better problem solve. We're able to kind of have a new vantage point or new perspective because of these new neural connections that are taking place. And, all around, I think it makes you a better parent because you're more present. Your mind isn't wandering all over the place. Like some plant medicines like cannabis, for example, like, if somebody consumes cannabis, a lot of times they're aloof and they're not present to where they are. They're having their own kind of escape
Spinning
or
in their head.
experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And they're just stuck in their head. Whereas with I find with psilocybin, you're very present. Wherever you are, you're there, which is kind of a unique experience because a lot of times, a lot of tools that people use don't allow them to be as present as we need to be, especially this day and age.
Yeah, I think that's super rare. It's like, and I love that you brought up like parents as well, because I think that having like being more present with your kids is something that they're looking forward to,
Mm-hmm.
So that's so interesting. I've always heard that psilocybin, when you consume it, it's actually food poisoning. That's what you're going through. Is that true or not?
Oh, that's interesting because you'd have to take a lot for it. I don't even think there is a lethal dose of it. So to call it a poison is kind of an interesting description, but I've never heard anyone put it that way.
Okay. I have no scientific backing for that. I think I've just heard people repeat that, which feels like it could be, like a urban myth when people don't understand science.
Well, I mean, it could be something that I need to explore a little bit further, but I've never heard it put into that context. It's kind of interesting to hear it that way.
Yeah.
I know that when I've had food poisoning, I wasn't tripping or I wasn't solving deep like childhood traumas or getting downloads from the universe. I'm usually like downloading into a toilet, like vomiting or exploding, right? So it's kind of the opposite of that, I guess.
Interesting. All right. Well, I mean, when you come on next month for our monthly, moving forward, we'll talk about it again.
Okay.
Just kidding. All right. So one thing I really wanted to dive into, because, we're on the Low Carb Hustle podcast. A lot of people are either low carb or going keto or carnivore, that route. You have a really cool 6-week reset called your metabolic reset. And it's a low fat ketogenic diet. We were talking a little bit about like why that would be and how sometimes people are not ready for a higher fat diet because, we're dealing with fatty liver syndrome or their gallbladder is not processing like the medium chain triglycerides correctly. Can you talk a little bit about the benefits of a low carb ketogenic or a low fat ketogenic diet and what that looks like? What are you eating on a regular basis?
Yeah, absolutely. So a low fat ketogenic diet is basically you're eating lots of vegetables. You're eating some specific fruits like berries in particular that are low glycemic. You're eating, healthy sources of protein like beef or chicken or fish, in this case, low fat fish. And, you're eating some starches. So the goal here is to keep our clients with a very stable blood sugar. And many times when people come to us, so context is very important, right? And so many times when people are coming to us, they have metabolic syndrome, they have hypertension, they have, cardiovascular issues, they usually have joint aches and pains, maybe an autoimmune condition that they're dealing with. And so one of the key things that we want to do is we want to reestablish a healthy gut microbiome. And many of these people have something called leaky gut. And leaky gut is where you have a hyperpermeability of the intestinal membrane. So our digestive system, if you were to, swallow something, it's literally still outside of your body. It's not in your bloodstream until it's digested and gets small enough to actually cross the gut barrier. And that gut barrier in people who are under a lot of stress and people who consume a high fat diet becomes hyperpermeable. So that actually increases the likelihood of leaky gut syndrome, which increases the likelihood of autoimmunity and a whole bunch of other, nasty things that people don't want. So when people come to us, they're often in that state. They're high stress, they already have a leaky gut. And so they want to lose weight, they want to feel good, they want to feel energized. So the first thing that I have to tell people is we have to change the state of their nervous system. So when somebody is in a sympathetic dominant state, a fight or flight state constantly, because they're overstimulated with caffeine, they're overstimulated because they're watching their news, they're overstimulated because of financial stress or relationship stress or a lack of coping mechanisms, or they don't breathe correctly. That's a whole other topic in itself, is proper breathing mechanics. That leads to a sympathetic dominant state. When you're in a sympathetic dominant state, the interesting fun fact, Nate, is that when we're in a high stress fight or flight state, our liver only gets liver and kidneys get about 5% of our blood flow. In a relaxed state, our liver and kidneys get 50% of our blood flow. So when you're sitting there in a calm meditative state, perhaps reading a book, relaxed, chilled out, 50% of your blood is going to your liver and kidneys. However, when you're stressed out, only 5% of your blood is going to your liver and kidneys. So imagine the same context applies for the digestive system. In a state of fight or flight, you have an 80% decrease of blood flow to your digestive system. So if I want people to detox better, if I want their liver to function better, their gallbladder, the digestive organs, their kidneys, and elimination pathways to work better, the first thing I need to do is not give them a bunch of pills or change their diet. The first thing I need to do is actually get them into a parasympathetic state. When we're in a parasympathetic state, then all of our body's healing mechanisms actually turn on. So in a fight or flight state, everything that's necessary for survival is activated, and anything that's unnecessary for survival, like digestion, detoxification, reproduction, immune function, memory, cognition, sleep, all of those things shut down when we're in fight or flight. So no wonder people have, cancer, diabetes, heart disease, insomnia, cognitive decline. I mean, that's the recipe for all of those things. So the first thing we need to do is shift them into a parasympathetic state. And it's in a parasympathetic state that all of our healing actually takes place. The most parasympathetic thing that we can do is sleep, right? And you know this, that most of our fat burning actually occurs while we're sleeping. And why is that? Because fat is an adequate energy source at an appropriate pace, right? When we're drinking, when we're under stress, we need a fire hose of energy, right? And that's what adrenaline gives us. That's what, increasing our blood sugar will do for us. It gives us a fire hose of energy for us to be able to escape whatever stress we're under. Whereas when you're sleeping, you can sip energy through a straw. And so if we can get into this persistent homeostatic state of being more parasympathetic, for most people, it's 80-20. 80% of the time they're stressed out, 20% of the time they're calm. What we need to do is flip it. So we need to be, our body can handle the 20% of running around, getting stuff done, hustle, hustle, hustle. But then 80% of the time we need to be in a parasympathetic state. And it's in that parasympathetic state that our preferential source of fuel is actually fat. And so for most people, especially with people who come to us, the fat that they're holding on to is representative of more than just, an unsightly visual. It's actually inflammation. It's most toxins are fat soluble, so it's a storehouse for fat soluble toxins, which are most of the toxins that we are exposed to. It's a source of excess estrogen production, so our fat cells produce more estrogen, and so that causes an estrogenification. In women, that leads to estrogen dependent cancers. In men, that leads to hormonal shifts and changes. It also leads to a shift in our insulin resistance. So we need to uncouple it, unwind some of these things. So what we do is we put people on a low fat ketogenic diet, so their blood sugars are rock solid and stable, and then we incorporate meal timing and intermittent fasting. So we get them to eat in a certain window of the day, and then that fasting period allows them to properly and adequately heal. We also do simple things like changing their light bulb. So believe it or not, based on the color temperature of the bulbs, the direction that light is coming from, and the type of lighting, it will actually shift you from a sympathetic state into a parasympathetic state. So all of our clients get a flicker-free red bulb that they put in their bedroom or in the room that they spend the most time in the evening, and that instantly shifts them into a more parasympathetic state. So the one thing that we want to recognize is that cortisol is highest in the morning, and then it gets lower as the day goes on. But in the presence of bright overhead lighting or blue light, which is what we get from our TVs and smartphones and devices like that, our cortisol levels are going to go up. And cortisol is an antagonist to melatonin. So your body can't make cortisol and melatonin at the same time. It's either making one or the other. So one of the key signals to melatonin production is the absence of light. So getting people's rooms and environments as dark as possible, or having red light present, will not raise their cortisol levels and will allow them to make adequate amounts of melatonin, which allows them then to get deeper sleep. And it's in that deeper sleep that their body, again, preferentially burns and utilizes fat as an energy source. The other thing that good sleep will do is it will change the level of satiation and cravings that people have. So in order for us to, and please tell me if I'm getting too technical, I just want to be helpful here. So one of the things that sleep does is adequate amounts of sleep will allow us to make the right amounts of ghrelin and leptin. So when you think of the word ghrelin, think of gremlins. So ghrelin, when our ghrelin levels are high because we didn't sleep well, we're going to feel hungry all the time. Okay.
You don't want to feed them after midnight.
Yeah,
or after
exactly.
sundown, or whatever it is.
Exactly, right? So when it gets dark, don't feed them. And that's a good rule for us as well. But a poor night's sleep will raise our ghrelin. So these are people that are just going to be hungry all the time. And then the other thing that happens is when we don't get adequate sleep, we become leptin resistant. And when we become leptin resistant, then we never feel full. So no matter how much we eat, we never feel full. So these are people that are just going to be like zombies looking for food all the time. Now, here's the thing that's interesting. A good night's sleep will also help us replenish our body's ability to make dopamine. And so dopamine is a neurotransmitter of focus, of action, and of reward. And so we recommend is getting a good night's sleep, and then in the morning, getting about 10 minutes of outdoor sunlight, especially first thing in the morning. What that'll do is it'll raise their dopamine levels naturally, because the unnatural or the alternative way to raise dopamine is sugars and fat. So a lot of times when people are craving sugar or fat, we start questioning, okay, are you sleeping adequately? So it's not a question of willpower. It's a question of biology. So are you sleeping properly? So let's look at your lighting. Let's look at your meal timing. Let's look at how deep your sleep is. Let's look at the conditions of your bedroom. And then are you getting enough sunlight in the morning? That 10 minutes of sunlight in the morning is going to boost that dopamine so you feel more focused, more inspired to take action, and you also feel a sense of reward, because if you don't get that jolt of dopamine in the morning, then you're going to be looking for an alternative source. And for some people, it's coffee. For some people, it's sex. For some people, it's porn. For some people, it's a cigarette. For some people, it's marijuana. For some people, it's fat. And for some people, it's sugar. So we all have this, dopamine depleted environment or lifestyle that leads to these behaviors, which feel good when we do them, but we know they're bad for us because we're smart enough to know that they're not good for us, but it's because we're actually not understanding the biological implications of low dopamine and how to correct and fix that.
Well, all right. So I'd love to just summarize all this stuff. I don't think I can do it justice. So what I would like you to do, if you're listening to this right now, is I want you to rewind about 7 minutes and listen to what Sachin just said again, because that could be one of the most impactful 7 minutes that you could have on your health long term. Because Sachin, I asked you about low fat, ketogenic, like a nutrition question, and you talked a lot about sleep. You talked about hormones. You talked about lighting, and how important they were in order to essentially get what we want, right? We all want to be lean, have good muscle tone, have a lot of energy, feel really focused, right? And we always look at nutrition. Are you meal prepping? Are you eating these things? And you were like, no, you have to look at such a bigger picture than this. So your metabolic reset program, obviously people aren't going to be able to just like take everything out of this sentence. So if they want more, they want to connect with you or have that additional layer of accountability and get into that community we kind of talked about earlier, how would they do that?
Yeah, they can obviously go to our website and learn more about the system and how it works, and they can see some great testimonials and case studies. They can go to mymetabolicreset.ca. A big thing, just if I could add, Nate, is looking at our health from a multifaceted approach. So, you think of a diamond. I'm sure maybe you bought your wife a diamond when you got married, right? So men know more about diamonds than women do. It's kind of funny, actually. And so when you buy a diamond, there's a few things that you look for. One is the number of facets. The number of facets determines the brilliance of the diamond. The other thing you look at is a table. So the table is a top facet of the diamond, and the bigger the table, the bigger usually the diamond is. And so a lot of times when we think about lifestyle and nutrition and optimization of our health, we focus a lot on diet and exercise, which are super, super important. However, there's other facets to that diamond that we also need to work on. And when we work on all of those things in what we would consider like a compound effect, that's when we get the full brilliance of what our body and health has to offer us. So for us, we're looking at, yes, we want to focus on what you're eating, but we want to understand how your biology can work for you instead of against you in staying compliant to this process. Because if somebody's not getting good sleep, they're going to make bad food choices. If somebody's not getting the right amount of sunlight at critical times of the day, they're going to make bad food choices. If somebody's not in the right lighting environment, then that's going to create this cascade effect and they're going to make bad food choices. If somebody isn't breathing correctly and they're sympathetic dominant because of the way they breathe, they're going to make bad food choices. In fact, the way you breathe is so deterministic in your overall health. And it's something that is literally almost overlooked by every healthcare practitioner. So, we incorporate, proper breathing technique for our clients and awareness so that they can use their breath, each and every single breath that they take, as a tactical approach to improving their health. We talk about steps each day, and people take, let's say 5,000 to 10,000 steps each day, which is considered good. And you may or may not take those steps. You probably do, Nate, but the average person may or may not. However, something that we do, whether we like it or not, every single day is we breathe. So if we breathe 23,000 times a day, which is the average for most people, what if we could do, that more consciously with more awareness? Your breathing is very deterministic in so many things, in your blood pressure, in your lymphatic drainage, in your organ health, right? It's also deterministic in whether you'll develop cancer or not. It's deterministic in your mood, your ability to focus. So all of your immune system also depends on how you breathe. There's something called nitric oxide, which you're probably well aware of, and your listeners are probably well aware of. Certain breathing techniques can actually increase nitric oxide production by 1,500%. So yes, you can take nitric oxide boosting agents like citrulline and arginine and nitrates, but you can also breathe correctly and increase it naturally. And nitric oxide is an antiviral, antibacterial, and a vasodilator, as many of us know. So so these things all tie into one another. And so we look at, essentially our goal is to make the patient their own doctor and show them that you have a cornucopia of tools that are readily available to you for you to improve your health in so many meaningful ways. And so tapping into that compound effect and learning these skills and developing them as assets to you is great, because you can also teach it to the people that you love and care about so easily as well.
Sachin, this has been absolutely mind blowing. Like, obviously, like always talking to you is the best, but like, I think I probably have more questions than I did when I first started off today. I want to hear more about the breathing. I want to hear about more about nitric oxide. I want to talk more about fatty liver. I want to talk more about mushrooms. Like, this has been phenomenal. So thank you so much for being a guest on this. I'm going to put some of those links in the show notes that we talked about, to your metabolic reset, to your website where people can find out more about you. But guys, you got to, if you have not yet, go find Sachin on social media. At least he's always putting out good content, great reminders, good, powerful quotes that are going to help us get closer to just that vibrant health that we're looking for. And I just want to like follow up, and just the last thing to say, I love what you said about breathing. And I know that I'm not the only one right now who's like actively breathing, like thinking really hard about it. But we breathe 23,000 times a day. How can we, like, if we can get 1% better at that and use that as an identity shift, be like, I'm the type of person who cares enough about this to create healthy breaths that are going to allow me to thrive, have more energy, burn more fat, be in a more parasympathetic nervous system dominant state, then that's just going to snowball into some of these other things that we've spoken about today. But man, I just want to say thank you so much for just coming and dropping so much knowledge and wisdom on us today.
My pleasure, my friend. So good to see you again. And thank you to all the listeners for tuning in. I hope you found value in this and you're able to implement some of the things we talked about.
And don't worry, guys, I'm going to bother Sachin like a lot over the next couple months to get him back on the show, because man, so much left unsaid, uncovered. So thanks again, brother. I'll talk to you very soon.